Here's what we'll cover in this Sicilian Defense Najdorf Variation lesson. First, the baseline theory, the main line you need to know. Next, why every one of these moves actually works. Then, the key variations you're likely to run into. And finally, a common beginner mistake and exactly how to punish it. The Najdorf variation is the most fought over line in the Sicilian defense, chosen by Fischer, Kasparov, and just about every attacking player since. Black meets White's central ambitions with a sharp counterattack from the flank, and instead of mirroring White's setup, builds a flexible structure that can strike in either the center or the queen side. It rewards preparation and punishes anyone who plays it on autopilot. White opens with the king's pawn, the most direct way to claim the center and free both the queen and the light-squared bishop. It's an immediate declaration of intent: control the middle of the board and develop quickly. Black refuses to meet the center head-on and instead strikes from the side. This is the whole idea of the Sicilian: give White a bigger pawn presence for now in exchange for faster piece play and a half-open c-file later. White brings the knight to its most natural square, adding a defender to the center and getting ready to push d4 next. It's quiet, but it's the move every mainline Sicilian depends on. Black shores up the c5 pawn and keeps the position flexible rather than committing the center too early. This modest little move is actually the hinge the whole Najdorf setup swings on. Now White strikes, offering a central pawn to rip the position open. If Black doesn't take, White gets a huge center for free, so this trade is practically forced. Black takes, and for a moment that pawn sits deep in White's camp. It won't stay there long, but the trade has already done its job. Black opens the c-file for a future rook and speeds up development. White recaptures with the knight instead of the queen, and this is a small but important decision. A knight on d4 is active and safe, eyeing b5 and f5, whereas a queen there would just get kicked around by minor pieces. Black develops with tempo, attacking the e4 pawn immediately. White has to answer this threat right now, which is exactly the kind of forcing active play the Sicilian is built around. White meets the threat by developing rather than by pushing a pawn, defending e4 while also grabbing extra control of d5. Both of White's knights are now doing real work. And here's the move that gives the whole variation its name. Black stops White's knight from ever jumping into b5 and quietly prepares to expand with b5 next, aiming that queenside majority straight at White's position. This is the tabia every Najdorf player has to know cold. White has a touch more space and easy development, but Black's structure is resilient and packed with long-term plans, pushing b5, fighting for d5, and generating queenside counterplay while White looks to attack on the other wing. The English attack is White's most ambitious try against the Najdorf. Instead of castling early, White keeps the king in the center for a move or two and throws the f and g pawns forward, racing to attack Black's king before Black can finish developing. The bishop steps out to e3, backing up the knight on d4 and clearing the way to castle queenside later if White wants to. It's a purely developing move, but it's the signature first step of the whole system. Black hits back in the center immediately, kicking the knight and grabbing space. It does leave a small hole on d5, but that's a fair price for pushing White's most active piece off its best square. The knight simply steps aside to b3, out of harm's way, and still eyeing useful squares like c5. Retreating here costs no time at all, since the knight was going to move eventually anyway. Black brings the light-squared bishop out to challenge that knight and stake a claim on d5. It's a natural developing move that also gets the bishop off the back rank before the position opens up. And here's the move that gives the English attack its name. White locks down e4, takes the g4 square away from Black's knight, and clears a path to storm forward with g4 and eventually h4. The classical treatment is the calm answer to the Najdorf. Rather than racing to attack, White just finishes developing, tucks the king away with quick castling, and looks for a small, lasting edge in a normal middle game. White develops the bishop to its most modest square, purely so the king can castle next move. There's no trick here, it's just solid, get organized chess. Black plays the same central strike as before, kicking the knight off d4 and grabbing space in the middle. Again, the knight steps back to b3 rather than getting into any tactical trouble, happy to let black have some space for now. Black finishes kingside development with a simple, flexible bishop move, getting ready to castle and tuck the king away. White castles, and the position settles into a normal middle game. White looks to expand with c4 or f4, while black plans the usual queenside counterplay with b5. Once both sides reach this familiar position, some players get tempted by a move that looks useful but isn't, bringing the queen out to f3. It seems to eye black's kingside, but it does nothing a normal developing move wouldn't do better, and it costs precious time. The queen steps out to f3 early, looking like it's putting pressure on the king side, but there's no real target here yet, and white still has an entire queen side to develop. A move like this just invites black to develop with tempo against it later. Black doesn't panic and doesn't need to defend anything specific, just calmly prepares to fianchetto the bishop, which will cover the long diagonal and keep the king safe behind it. White finally gets around to developing the other knight. It's a fine move on its own, but the queen on f3 is already starting to look like it's in the way rather than doing anything useful. The bishop completes its fianchetto, aiming down the long diagonal and adding real pressure toward the center. Black is fully caught up in development, while white's queen still has nothing useful to do on f3. White plays a slow, purely defensive pawn move just to stop any future annoyance from a black piece landing on g4. It doesn't develop anything and slightly weakens the king side, exactly the kind of move you're forced into when you've wasted time earlier. The takeaway. In the Najdorf, an early queen move that doesn't create a concrete threat is just a wasted tempo. Stick to normal development, knights and bishops before the queen, and white gets the comfortable position instead of an awkward one.